exploring ideas about ego, death, and beyond. I've long been a casual student of different religions. I like to know how people think about different things, the unanswerable questions that we all have, in life. The questions a lot of people give us pat answers to, but there is no consensus, it seems, among the experts. If you ask a Christian fundamentalist teacher, you ask a priest, you ask Dalai Lama, you ask, a dozen different religions, people from a dozen different religions about what happens when you die, you're going to get slightly different answers, especially if you want details. So, we're born, as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and then the baby slowly develops what's commonly called an ego. And I know the word ego is much detested by the likes of like Scott Mandelker. Anybody says the word, they're automatically a fool. But it is a real subset of, what can I want to say about ego? I guess the negatives people say about it is there is no ego, it's a false concept. And, it's a fuzzy concept, so it's hard to say it's true or false because people have different ideas on what it means. And I'm not taking the strict view of it. I'm taking the popular view of what ego means. Basically, personality. And that part of you that wants to defend the personality. That part of you that wants to defend your ideas. So it's core personality, but it's also got a different component to it, kind of a more spiritual component where it's a hook into the spiritual side of you, where you're putting your energies into really foolish stuff that is, temporal. It's just going to go away anyway. So I'm going to use the term widely in common sense for ego. Like I said, we're born blank. Then we have little hurts, disappointments, scoldings. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that. We got to conform to the rules. We're kind of beaten into shape. Like the hot rod pulled out of the forge. And beaten by the blacksmith down to the desired shape. That's kind of like what our childhood is. It's a lot of little injuries. You hurt yourself, you fall off your bike trying to learn how to bike. You have different experiences. Some of them that'll stick to you for life, and end up as being aversions in your life. As an adult, you're a pile of aversions to different things that that hurt you during life. Things that were little hurts, little disappointments. All those little aversions kind of pile up. That's basically all your personality really is. Of course, the positive parts, are there too. You find things that work for you, and you do more of them. If I find being nice to people makes them nice to me, so I'll do more of them. Hopefully people get that lesson. A lot of people obviously take the opposite lesson. The positive path, the negative path, etc., etc. And I know I should stop saying that so much. So, the other thing about personality is your interests in the world. So aside from aversions and the negative stuff that happens to you and your reactions to the negative stuff and the scabs, the scabs and the wounds, our interests. And people get interested in trivial things like sports, art, music, beautiful things. Education, all this kind of stuff kind of shapes your personality too, but that's more about your mind and your mental makeup. And that's all just another pile, you know. It's a pile of hurts and aversions on one hand. It's a pile of facts and things that have caught your fancy on the other hand. All blended together. That's your personality. And the view is with the later people I talked about, which is like Tom Campbell, Ra, and pretty much the Eastern viewpoint, is that your personality doesn't survive death. And Tom Campbell was, I should post whichever one he did there in a recent talk. He was talking about what happens after death, and it was really quite detailed from a guy who's, mostly talking physics and facts and figures. So Tom really has two sides to him. If you listen to some of his fireside chats, when students ask him more detailed questions, he's got detail to give them. And it's a guy who's done so much remote, viewing, is a big part of his life story. I'm inclined to listen to the man, not necessarily believe him. Although I believe most of what he says. I believe what everybody says. And then I wonder, it's called syntronics. You basically believe, you take in whatever anybody's saying to you as true. And obviously, if you do that, you're going to have a lot of conflicts. But what you do is you take in what they say as true, but you say to yourself, this is true in what sense? This is true from what perspective is this true? So you take in not only the person's objective facts he's laying out to you, but his viewpoint, how he sees what he's seeing, not just what he sees. Not just his opinion, but why he's got that opinion and from what angle that opinion came from. And to me, it makes a lot of sense that the ego or personality wouldn't survive death, because you need a good reset. And that's kind of what life and death is all about, if you ask a lot of people. I think I agree. You die to get out of the groove. Nothing shakes you out of your groove more than a death. So if you came back with your same personality, your past life memories, the same kind of ego and tone, then you're likely just to keep repeating you're likely to fall right back into the same old track you came out of, with some variation, and learn very little. So it's more helpful to start with nothing, start with a blank slate, build it up from scratch. And to me, that's always been a point of concern to me. Because what is all this studying I'm doing, if it's all going to be lost? Spend all this time in college and, high school, college, and God, people do graduation school and all that, and to have it all get lost after you die? I mean, what if you went through 8 years of grad school after 4 years of college and then got wiped out by a car the day you graduated with your doctorate, I mean, like, I don't know.